And during my research, I learned a lot about how they reproduce, and it was so fascinating to me. Snails are hermaphroditic, so they're both male and female in a way. And when they meet each other, something really interesting happens. They spend a few hours just sort of checking each other out because they can't see very well. And so they just sort of like, nibble each other and slide over each other and kind of court each other. And then they attempt to stab each other with something called a love dart that contains a whole bunch of hormones. And whoever gets stabbed first gets to have the babies. And it was so funny to me. And I was like, I have to make a film about this. And I thought it was watching videos about snails like meeting each other and mating. It was so like kind of intimate and sweet. And I thought that was something very wonderful about nature that I wanted to share with the world. This sort of cute romance and life and birth and continuation, natural cycles, things like that. And so these are some of the sketches that I did in the very beginning, just sort of using reference images and videos and thinking about what I wanted to capture in terms of the mood of my film. And then these were just a few of the many materials I collected from my surroundings. I would go out every day and just sort of look at things and figure out what shapes inspire me and what colors inspire me, what forms, how do I think they could perform under the camera. And I would just sort of bring them back and lay them out on a piece of paper and rearrange them and put them in lines and rows and piles until I kind of felt like there was something happening. And I also brought my camera and took tons and tons of pictures of things that inspired me. There were so many cool shapes, mushrooms, little lichens, fern spores. I took like probably, 500 pictures, just like bringing my camera around every day just to find anything that was inspiring to me, which was amazing to come back with now that I have all of this material to work with. It was really like an amazing time to just gather every day. And then an important part of filmmaking is usually making a storyboard. And so these are just a few images from my storyboard. My film is going to be sort of experimental, using a lot of natural materials to animate with, but there's going to be sort of an underlying narrative. And so if there's a narrative, then it needs to be sort of mapped out. And so I spent some time just kind of drawing the sort of steps in this story of, two snails kind of going on a journey through a natural environment and meeting each other and, falling in love and celebrating life and sort of exploding in this whirlwind of blossoms and growth and new seeds and everything. And the picture on the left is sort of a style frame of using sort of oil pastels and crayon to explore maybe some 2D animated segments, or if there is like drawing in the film, what I might want the color palette to look like. And these are the puppets that I made. These were really fun to make. I used clay to sculpt 2 snail shells. And then there's a hole inside each one where I can insert an armature wire. And then formed around the armature wire is plasticine, which is the material that is commonly used in claymation, which you probably have seen in old horror movies or maybe Christmas movies. And the plasticine and the wire can be posed a little bit at a time to create the stop motion animation. And so my plan with these puppets was to see if I could maybe try animating outside. And in stop motion, that's usually a big no-no. It's kind of the opposite of the situation that you want to be in when you're about to animate, because it's all about control, having a controlled source of light, having a controlled temperature, controlled airflow, so nothing is interrupting your animation process and you don't get that jiggle and chatter and movement when you don't mean it to be. But I thought it would be so interesting if what would happen if I put my camera outside and put this puppet outside and just see what would happen and kind of let nature decide how my shot would look. And it was admittedly a little bit scary, but as you'll see, some cool stuff happened in the camera. And so, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second, but I do have a video for you. Let's see if I can pull that up. can everybody see that? A little holly leaf on the screen? Cool. Before I play it, I feel it might be useful to, oh wait, yeah, okay, there's actually, I see what I missed now. There's one more slide I want to show you. That was what was wrong. I knew there was something off. Just give me 1 minute. There is one final slide. There it is. It was hiding on me. I think it's a little bit useful since I do experimental animation to kind of explain what I mean by that. And so for the image on the left, this was natural materials that I placed under a camera facing down, and every frame kind of moving it around, seeing what would happen. And that's one way I do experimental animation. I'm always thinking about sequences. So when I'm collecting leaves or seeds or ferns, I'm often arranging them and thinking about them in a way like, okay, if I put them from the smallest leaf that I found to the biggest leaf, it'll look like it's growing. Or if I put, all of these sort of weird twigs together, it might look like they're convulsing or something. So I'm always trying to think about movement just that is suggested by the shape that already exists in nature. And that sort of is what you're seeing on the right side of this image. The 6 pictures are a sculpture that some of you might recognize from Sitka. It's a sort of trail marker behind the cabins. And it has around it all of these sort of metallic rusted coils. And that was one of the first things that I got really interested in while I was there. I stumbled upon it and I thought it might have been like weird mushrooms or something, but I was surprised when I touched it that it was metal. And so one of the clips that you'll see in the video that I'm about to show you features this sculpture. And I did not do anything to the sculpture. I simply just took a series of images of it, but I arranged the images in a way to suggest that one of the tendrils was independently moving on its own, as you'll see. And that's kind of the magic of animation, and that's what I love about it. So let me show you this video, and there's no sound or anything, so I can kind of talk you through it, but it's a combination of the experimental animation I did, a little bit of 2D drawing animation, and finally some stop motion animation with those snail puppets that I showed you. I'm gonna also see if I can maybe loop it just so you can see it a few times. Loop, there we go. All right. So there's some leaves, ferns that I found. There's that sculpture. And as you can see, I tried to make one of the tendrils look like it was sort of moving back and forth. Some mushrooms, seed pods and leaves. And again, just sort of letting them fall into each other, letting the plants kind of decide what was going to be the next step. Use a bit of that drawing. And these were so fun to make. I would just kind of plunk myself somewhere outside and hope that the sun didn't set before I was done. But this one was cool because the sun did set while I was shooting, and the snail happened to look up right at that moment. I think that's really magical. But yeah, I don't know. I've never really shot outside before, so this was a really inspiring experience for me, and I hope to kind of continue to explore these techniques while I finish up this film, because it was really, really amazing to not know how it was going to look until I was done. But yeah, I'll let the video play one more time, and while that's going, I guess I just want to say thank you to all the folks at Sitka. It was a really, really awesome experience, and definitely one that I'll never forget. And I definitely hope to go back and keep exploring that area one day, because it was so, so inspiring, and I've never been anywhere like it. And thank you to everyone for supporting me, and I was just giving me the opportunity in the first place and having this show and tell. It's, this year has been really hard for a lot of artists, and to be able to like kind of give myself permission to work on something, to have a reason to work on something, and then to be able to show it to people, I'm really, really grateful for that. But yeah, I still have a lot of work to do on this film, but I think, as you can see, I gained a lot from my residency, and I have a lot to work with now. I mean, more than a lot. I have to sift through all 500 of those pictures and figure out how they're going to fit together. But yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. But anyway, thank you so, so much, and I hope that you enjoyed.
Alice, thank you so much. I'm smiling with delight, and I can't think of a better way to start 2021 than with just an ear-to-ear, uncontrollable smile from a place of delight. Thank you. Justin Gibbens first began moving pencil on paper nearly 40 years ago, rendering the boyhood standards, dinosaurs, creepy crawlers, and other freakish fauna. Not much has changed in 4 decades. Admittedly, he has a keen and unhealthy interest in all things that scamper and poke about in the undergrowth, slither in the thickets, soar through the ether, and swim. Gibbens received his BA in painting from Central Washington University in 1998 and a scientific illustration certificate from University of Washington in 2003. He is a founding member of Punch Projects, a Central Washington-based artist collective. Gibbens was the recipient of a 2006 Pollock Krasner Foundation Award, a 2008 Artist Trust Fellowship Award, and most recently a Macmillan Foundation Mac Fellowship in 2019. His work has been collected by Grinnell College, Microsoft, For Culture King County, the City of Seattle, the City of Kent, the City of Shoreline, the Washington State Arts Consortium, and the Washington State Arts Commission. In addition to his studio practice, Gibbens has begun adapting his images for larger scale public mural projects. Gibbens lives in rural Thorpe, Washington, with his dangerously talented wife, Renee Adams. And Justin was one of 3 Jordan Schnitzer printmaking residents who came to Sitka over the course of the last year to work with master printmaker Julia DeMario, who I think might be listening in to the presentations too. So please make some noise out there for Justin and for Julia. And Justin, can't wait to hear your presentation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Allison. That was very, very nice to hear you. Sometimes I forget all the things that I have done over the years. And Alice, that was, fantastic. There's no shortage of inspirational things at Sitka. And I hope to share a little bit of that with you here in the next 10 minutes. I think I want to maybe split my time between giving you a bit of a background as to what I do in my own studio practice back home, but then also focus on how my 2 weeks was spent at Sitka. So with no further ado, let me see if I can do this screen share. Okay. Oh, let's back that up one. Okay. So if you've been to Sitka and if you've spent any time wandering around there, there's an amazing feature, the Cascade Head. You can climb up and get a pretty fantastic vista of the spit across the Salmon River. Of course, you got the ocean to the right. Very inspirational. As Allison was saying, my background is in natural science illustration, and I couple that with traditional techniques found in Chinese fine line painting. And I kind of like to think that what I do is a bit of subversive natural history. So I'm using the conventions of natural history illustration in maybe unconventional ways. The images that you're seeing here are observational studies, and it's a series that I call liminal spaces. And I've been working on this body of work for, a year and a half now, maybe. And it just seemed like after several years of mainly relying on natural history source material, wildlife illustrations, and I would generally look at all these different images and do composite types of images based on these previously made pieces. I thought, well, maybe it would be important for me to just spend some time and really hone my observational skills. And it's such a great discipline to just have a three-dimensional specimen in front of you, and it really makes you aware of how much you don't know about a thing. So learning to appreciate the forms that are all around us, really, using drawing and illustration as a method of doing that is just a fantastic experience. And it can be a meditation of sorts too. So I guess I like to think of it as my little way of retreating from things when you're there in your studio and you have this object in front of you, and sometimes time just seems to disappear. So yeah, I take these things. These are generally unfortunately they're either roadkill or they're casualties of window accidents or power lines, and people who know me and know that I've been doing this will gift me these things. So I have a freezer full of birds I've yet to paint. So I like to animate them in such a way that's a little ambiguous exactly where they are, and there's no reference to any background material. So you just have this singular image floating in this ambiguous space. And sometimes I can get my hands on things besides birds, and anything with fur presents its own challenges. So this guy, I was kind of thinking of maybe like a Muybridge animation, where you have multiple exposures, maybe overlap, suggesting more than just a static image. So there's a bit of some more energy there, or ambiguity. Again, this is watercolor, primarily in ink on paper. I'm working, I tend to work larger than life when possible. So I think this piece is 3 feet by 3 feet. Now, as a kind of counterpoint to that previous series, I also have an ongoing series that I call Sea Change. So I'm using, primarily I'm using marine mammals as my primary source material or image that is featured in this series. And I think, I don't know, part of it was I was just growing a little wearisome and tired of all the feather detail, so I wanted to paint something entirely different. So the smooth surface of a whale or a porpoise seemed to be a nice antidote to that. So kind of using these marine mammals as maybe stand-ins for our own experience. There's something about, I think, whales and manatee, seals, walruses. We can probably relate more to those species, those aquatic species, simply because they are mammals. So they have familial bonds. They breathe air. They're warm-blooded. They wear funny costumes. Yeah, so again, it's just using the conventions of natural science illustration in an unconventional sort of way. So how can this image serve as some sort of metaphor or speak about something that goes beyond just the pure beauty of the image, though I can appreciate that part of an image too. Okay, so I found myself at Sitka, and like Alice was saying, there's no shortage of inspiration there. I come from Central Washington, a small town, and it's kind of high. Julie informed me that it's not technically high desert because we're only about 1,500 feet. So it's called the shrub steppe. So I get to play with rattlesnakes and sagebrush and ponderosa pine. And by mid-fall, there is not much color in Central Washington. So it's to come to Sitka and just see the rainforest that's bursting with color, and of course the ocean, and then there's the marine life, or rather the shorebirds. You turn any rock over by the riverbank and you're going to find crustaceans. So really no shortage of inspiration. Look, some more gastropods. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys meet their demise on the road out in front of Sitka. So you'll see them after a rainy afternoon. So the first initial kind of exercises that we launched into when I arrived, it was 2 weeks, was working on so I'm working on small copper plates. This is etching. And I thought, well, if I'm just going to do some exercises to figure out what might be possible and what processes really might lend themselves to my own method of working, I thought I would just start with some more observational images. So I was bringing crushed little bits of crab claws into the studio, and this guy was fun little illustration. These are, if you've done etching before, you start off with either soft ground or hard ground. Soft ground is a little more gestural, perhaps more forgiving, and maybe more akin to drawing, whereas, well, hard ground, you're drawing as well, but it's a little more, I would say more precision is involved with that process. And I tended to gravitate towards that pretty quickly. So aside from the snail, what you're looking at is hard ground etching little exercises. Each of those is about maybe 6 by 8 inches in size. So this would be a typical day. We spent 8 hours in the printmaking studio. I would get the copper plate and spend most of that time working up the image. I have my reference material, and then Julia is there supervising, offering instruction. She's a tremendous repository of knowledge and experience, and it was so great to have her there. And she was really the technician. So anytime I had an issue with what I was working on or question, she was right there to help me sort it out. And then of course she was there doing all the additional technical procedures that are necessary when you're talking about copper plate etching. So here's another close-up. I'm working on an image. So I've done a preliminary drawing, and then that's been transferred onto the copper plate. And that's what you're looking at right there. It's the plate itself has been coated with this stuff called asphaltum, and it almost dries to a waxy-like surface. So I'm using these drawing tools, these needles, to gently carve away that film of wax to reveal the copper, and then that gets dunked into an acid bath, and that's where you get your etching from. So once it's gone through the acid bath, you wipe off the rest of that asphaltum, then you ink up the plate. So this is one of the first larger plates that is getting inked up. And then prepared paper that's been dampened is placed over the plate and pulled through the press. So this is the big reveal, I guess is what we call it. So let me show you some of these images. So I decided that, you know, this ocean, I couldn't shake it. There are all these species, these creatures out there in the water, and they won't reveal themselves to me. I thought, why don't I just continue with the whale imagery? And that seemed like a good focus for the 2 weeks. So the first image, I guess, you know, again, it's the animal as metaphor, just feeling mild sense of impending doom and gloom, I suppose. We were 2 weeks before the election, and it just seemed like, you know, things were about to implode on a national level. And then, of course, you know, we have the climate crisis, we have, you know, the racial reckoning that's you know, much needed, that obviously is on all of our minds, and then there's the global pandemic. So this is my white flag. So just feeling like, can we get 2020 over with? And we can, and we did. Oh, let me show this is a image created with 2 separate copper plates. Typically, you're not going to probably get 2 tones of ink out of a single plate. So if you want multiple colors, you have to use 2 separate plates to create that illusion. So the first image that I worked on was the whale, using, again, it was the hard ground etching drawing with the tools. And then we got into what's called aqua tinting. And that's a more painterly approach to getting the acid to create some value, darks and lights. And that's, I realized that using those two techniques in tandem, both the aqua tinting, so I'm painting the acid on, as well as doing the hard ground drawing with the drawing tools, was the best way to really get an image that I was satisfied with. So here we are pulling the second plate. This was an image that it was haunting me. It was right out of a news story. I think it was Tasmania. There was a mass stranding of pilot whales, and I was just thinking about all these whales piled up and how, you know, tragic the whole event was. And as soon as they were released and rescued from the sand, they would hear the distress calls and swim back to the beach. And so I thought it would make a pretty poignant image. The third image I got into was, this is you know, more anatomical. I think etching, because it's such a linear process, you're drawing, you're making these linear marks. Doing anything skeletal is like an obvious. So this was a fun image. Again, this is something that had been kicking around in my head for a while. I kept thinking I was going to paint it, but I think etching is like the perfect medium for this image. So our friend Jonah is inside the belly of the beast here. And then the final image, I was just about to do a spider, but I thought, no, I need to keep it in the family. I need to do another whale. But there's this amazing barn spider right outside the print studio that had spun this pretty fantastic web. And so I thought, well, what is a web but a net? So I thought maybe I could make a fishing net that would appear as if it was perhaps a spider web, and I could have this juxtaposition of this really delicate web with this solid image of the orca kind of ensnared in it. And I think this is the only plate, the only print where I did some hand coloring afterwards. So I went in with watercolor and painted the buoys just as a little detail. Okay, well, I think that finishes up my little presentation. Again, thank you, Allison. Thank you, Tamara, for your technical assistance today, and of course the rest of the staff. And Julia, I need to thank you if you're listening. Hello, and thank you. And also, I want to thank Ernie. I believe his name is Ernie Rose. He came in and did the photographs when we were working in studio one day. So thank you to him for those great photos. Helped tell the story about my experience at Sitka. Fantastic place. And I am in so much gratitude for selecting me to be one of your Jordan Schnitzer printmaking residents. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin. There are too many wonderful comments coming in to share all. I'll just share a few. Peg shares, Alice, your animations are wonderful, especially that snail trailing through the real life moss with real life light flickering all around. Wow. And Allison shares for Justin, appreciate the explanation of your process, both technical and emotional. Beautiful and poignant, Justin. Okay. Our next presenter is Alejo Salcedo, who is an artist from Washington, D.C., exploring the intersection of food, art, and medicine. Alejo received his printmaking degree at Guilford College in 2015, working closely with printmakers like Roy Nydorf, John Gall, and Bill Fick. Alejo has been involved in the public art space for the past 10 years, interning with artist Brian Peck in Washington, D.C., and working with the Greensboro Mural Project Cooperative in North Carolina. He has painted public and private murals around the US and abroad. In 2017, he began practicing tattooing with an emphasis on experience and collaboration. Beyond a visual art practice, Alejo seeks to live a creative lifestyle through an interactive existence with the natural landscape. And we're so glad he chose to live a chapter of that existence at Sitka this winter. Please join me in welcoming Alejo Salcedo.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Allison. Okay, so yeah, just to start off, I want to express gratitude for this opportunity, and I'm so happy to be part of a community of people who are pushing forward art and continuing to do meaningful things during a time that feels so unknown. So when I when I began this year, I'm gonna give you a quick little background on how I got here. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, given the nature of the world. And I ended up applying to work at several different farms and a few other artist residencies. And what happened was I only heard back from 2 farms and from Sitka as the artist residency. So previously, I was doing tattoos and murals, and I was falling into a flow in Atlanta, and I felt like, okay, this is gonna be something that I do for a while. I can see myself here for a little while. But again, the nature of the world and the pandemic and all of it brought things to a head, and I had to start making decisions. I couldn't tattoo people anymore. I couldn't do murals. So the farming came first. And one of the things that I learned was that when you're farming, or really when you are an artist, it's about expression. And so it doesn't really, your medium is an expression as a creative person. So being on a farm, I realized, I thought I was saying, oh, I'm going from being an artist to being a farmer. But really, no, it's just another form of expression, right? And so coming to Sitka was this thing where after I'd been farming a while and redefining kind of art in my head, it's like, okay, now I'm falling back into this artist mold. So how do I think about art in a new way, as I was before, while I was working in amongst my environment and having to solve these different creative or put in really the same kind of skills that were required in art. So I had some kind of big aspirations, and I wanted to do a series of prints that talked about the time. A lot of printmakers, like I'm sure you all have heard of, Posada, was one of the most famous, or were telling stories that were very relevant to their time. Richard Mock, another printmaker, was a cartoonist. So, he did very political kind of things. And I think about printmaking, and one of the steps, or one of the ways I wanted to approach it is like, how can I be more intentional with stories? Because tattooing is a lot of one-off individual images that you put on people's body. And so the context of this image is the body, as opposed to these layered, more complicated compositions that we see with other visual and fine arts. I'm gonna share my screen here. what I ended up doing, one second. Whoop. So yeah, what I ended up doing is I ended up doing two pieces of work that were very different in terms of the intention and the style of production. One was more of a timeless kind of natural approach, because to be honest, when I got to Sitka, I was very taken by the environment, as like I'm sure everybody was. And so I had these ideas about wanting to tell a story of the time we're in, and talking about medicine, and talking about our interaction with the natural world, but the seen and the unseen natural world. And what I decided to do is I decided to just kind of dive into the environment and do something a little more something a little simpler, to just break in and find a good pace. And one of the things that really has been interesting to me this year has been water, and I've been studying it in terms of the chemistry of it, and really, you know, how it works in our ecosystems, and what it does in our bodies, and how it's just this overlooked aspect of health. You know, water is a medicine, and water is not just water. Water from the ocean is completely different than water that comes out of your tap. So, inspired by water and these beautiful landscapes at Sitka, I decided to do a seabird. And being down, Night Park at the bottom of the hill is like a simple little park, but it was just an easy place to get up close and see herons and all these birds. And so I ended up doing a drawing that connected with me, and I took that drawing and I transferred it here to a large block, and then covered it in a little bit of red ink. This is just a technique that I find makes it easier to carve, and that I outlined it in Sharpie. And it's a very fun kind of flowy process, because, to connect the theme of water, birds and sea creatures are these symbols for water because of their interaction. They're really like, they're the animals closest to it and interacting with it the most. So for this print, I ended up doing a series, an edition of 13 prints. And here's the block. I'm not sure if you all can see, but when you're carving lino blocks, you work reductively. And working reductively essentially means pulling out an image from a black space, because these are like giant stamps. So if you were to just take a lino block, it would be an all black surface, and you're pulling out the whites. So one of the fun things about it is you decide how, even though it's not always obvious when you get a final print, you get to decide the movements you make when you're carving out the white spaces. So in this one, sometimes I'll just, when I'm carving out these white spaces, I'll just go all horizontally, or I'll go all vertically, just to get it over with. But this one, I had a lot of fun, and I kind of worked in ways. For instance, I would go around the fish and try and get very long pulls. If any of you worked with lino, you know, when you're dragging your V gouge through it starts to create this curl, and you can stop it, or you could just keep going, and you can pull a really long piece of linoleum out of it. Anyways, it was a process that, yeah, I just like thinking about water. It was like, oh, there are a lot of similarities here. And another thing about this particular print was that I approached it in a way that I don't normally do. Normally I do a lot of back and forth between pencil drawing and sharpieing and carving. So I'm not usually the kind of person who will completely draw it all out, completely carve it all out. I like to go back and forth and work with that that kind of I don't know, it adds more excitement when you can do multiple things at once. And this one, it was not like that. It was just, I'm doing it.
Alejo, our next presenter, Emma, has to get to a class at 5. If you have another image you want to show, I could come back to you, and maybe we could shift to Emma first so she can share her work and get to her class. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sorry. That works.
No, you're great.
Sorry about that.
Should I cancel the screen share?
Yeah, why don't you unscreen share, and I'll introduce Emma, and then we can come back, and I'd love to see your second work. We've got overall time, so we're great.
Okay.
Thank you for your flexibility. And I'll introduce Emma. So Emma Ekmekcan is an installation artist whose creative research draws comparisons between systems of the body and the environment to understand how we personify place and develop identity through our interactions with non-human nature. Emma is an MFA candidate at UCLA in Design Media Arts. She received her Bachelor of Arts from CSU Channel Islands and has studied at l'Accademia di Belle Arte di Firenze in Florence, Italy. Residing in Southern California, Emma collaborates with scientists and cross-cultural communities to bridge art and science. Please join me in welcoming and then saying a speedy goodbye to Emma.
Hi, everyone. Allison, thank you so much for the introduction. And there really aren't enough words to express how grateful I am for this opportunity. I remember when I met Tamara, the programs manager, and she told me this is an opportunity to have space and time, but most importantly, I want to add quiet. Coming from Los Angeles, this is a huge shift, and I can't list the number of ways that I've been inspired over this time. So as I start talking about my work, I want to involve you guys a little bit. So if you want to open up the chat and participate, I would like to know how you interact with algae daily, algae being seaweed on a daily basis. How do you feel that you interact with it? Please type any response in the chat. I'm open to anything. Sometimes the inspiration for my artworks come out of this way. So on that note, I'm really interested in understanding how our connection to nature is obscured in society and in contemporary society specifically, and the ways that is really affecting our connection with nature and what that means. And so I've taken a particular interest to algae and kind of looking back and trying to see what we've lost along the way. And so I've been doing research on the indigenous land usage of Cascade Head and trying to dip my toes into understanding how ancestors of the past have used land and where we are right now with resource extraction, land usage, and moving into the future, and what that demands within the climate crisis. Now I will show with you guys a little bit of what I've been working on. So let's see here. Okay, so my journey to the Sitka started from Los Angeles, and as I was going up the coast, I had the opportunity of stopping along the way, taking a few days to meet with scientists. Scientists are a huge part of my artistic process, and I work really well collaboratively with other people to gain inspiration. And so I've been doing a series of interviews regarding the kelp forest. I really want to know what's going on. How is this ecosystem absorbing CO2 and balancing out the rest of the world, and how it's allowing us to survive and to flourish? And something that I brought with me from Los Angeles, I'm really interested in these movements and how the environment is so relative to migration and these patterns. And so I brought with me a bucket that I had at home that is a bath of seagrass from Santa Barbara coast, so Southern California. And it's created this really strong, and I must say, very, very stinky pigment. And then moving here and seeing the kind of seaweeds that grow here, it's incredibly different. So two seaweeds that I've been studying over this period starting December 8th are Fucus disticus, known as rockweed. Here's a photo of rockweed. They have these beautiful little floats, or the part on the very top that look like little forks or little teeth, and I found them really charming. And I was also really interested in this seaweed, and I was reading an article from a past Sitka resident, Daniel Zobel, and he was talking about indigenous communities that would eat seaweed. And there's many archaeological studies around the world where seaweeds are used for the sources of iodine, sodium, and many other very nutritious and important factors of the human diet. So how has this been obscured in the objects that we interact with every day, from our toothpaste to our ice cream to the medium that we use for printing, for textiles? We're interacting with it every day, and it's become obscure. The second species of seaweed that I've grown a really fond attachment to while I've been here is Nereocystis luteana. And this is otherwise known as bull kelp. And they have these ginormous circular floats. And up here on the Northwest coast, unlike Southern California, you find them in abundance washed ashore. And these are really strong single, like if it was like just one stem that this plant is growing from, rooted to the bottom of the ocean floor on a rock. And these waves are so incredibly powerful in Oregon that they get ripped up. And so something that I've been doing is studying what happens to the seaweed. How long does it take for the seaweed to dry out? Is the seaweed moldable? Can it hold a form? And so this is one of the examples that was also seen in the photo, where I've been able to mold a circular shape into the seaweed. And you can see here I'm spreading apart the twine, but it actually has shrunken that much. So this was tight when I had woven it. And so what I plan to do with this took almost a whole week. Oregon is very moist to dry out fully. And this was collected in Lincoln City in a place that was safe to collect, not in Cascade Head, I must add. And so I've been really interested in what's the difference between the dry hardened seaweed. It's pretty rigid. And then another thing that I've been doing is experimenting with a soft seaweed, or adding a natural glycerin that will hydrate the seaweed. So then we have examples of these beautiful licorice-like cords. So this is the same material, but now this is hydrated instead of dehydrated. And if I try to pull it, I'm trying like really hard. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but this is incredibly strong. And so just imagine how powerful the waves are that has taken this ashore. And so I've been really curious with this. And my goal is to create more of these molds here, and to weave the soft hydrated seaweed into it and create a form that I can project sounds into. And so the sounds that I'll be projecting are the interviews of scientists talking about climate change and the kelp forest, a huge passion of mine. Going back to the beginning of the presentation, when I said I brought a little bit of seagrass pigment from me that I had extracted from Santa Barbara, I decided to take a mold of the floats from the rockweed found just down there, washed ashore in the estuary, I took a little mold and they all have these beautiful, diverse shapes. One of the things that really calls to me when I think of seaweed is its biodiversity. And that's something that we really need to sustain in the future, is to support biodiversity and to know that every species on this planet has a place. It's here for a reason. And so that's really a strong connection to nature that I feel. So what do you think that these molds are made of? So this mold is alginate, and this is what you buy in the store to make sculptural molds. And alginate is alginic acid that is extracted from seaweeds. So here's a little bit of cut up rockweed. Wow, just got it all over my computer. And so it makes a really interesting slime. Here, I'm kind of improvising now, a slime that can be used for many different things, and also the texture of what's added in many substances. And so I've decided to put these on ceramics, and I've been creating a bunch of small pieces that will act as a tapestry when woven together. So these are all the different floats, dipping my paintbrush in different organic materials to see how they fire differently, and just exploring my connection to seaweed overall, and what it means to me and how important that biodiversity is in sustaining that ecosystem. Yeah, and then here's a photo in the kiln. And then I'll show you one last video. So here's a little bit more process-based. Here's what the seaweed looks like before it goes into the glycerin mix. And the glycerin mix is a soy-based. It's a really oily, kind of waxy material, but it hydrates the seaweed really incredibly well. So yeah, I have hopes of working on this in the future and continuing to understand the human nature and culture paradigms, and how that pertains to my life and other people's lives. And yeah, I think that's all I have to share for today. But thank you everyone for being here and for listening. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, and Alejo, thanks for your flexibility. Do you want to go ahead and share your screen again and share your second image?
Sure, yeah. I will do
Pull it up and
quickly.
I'll share some comments while you're getting it up on the screen.
Okay.
Allison just shared for Emma. I really like how Emma describes her materials as she presents her work. And let's see, for Justin, so enjoyable, so cool. Thank you for sharing your in-depth, your inspiration and thought. Love the manatees and felt like the whale with the white flag. Thank you again, fabulous. So thanks everyone that's sharing comments. We can all see them at this end, even if I don't get a chance to read them. And take it back, Alejo.
Okay. So this is just, I just wanted to show this last, the final print of it, of the bird. And that again, was my simple water-based image and kind of a nod to Japanese block printing. Okay. The next image was more based on the story, as I was talking about, you know, the tying into the tradition of news and telling current stories in the history of printmaking. So here are some sketches I did of you know, again with the theme of seen and unseen, these unseen microorganisms that are existing all around us. And playing with what that might look like in kind of a, you know, an abstract way. So this all was pre-sketches for a larger print. And this is how far I got on it. This is where it is right now. But it's a lot more detailed, and and dealing with kind of themes of identity and, you know, the evolution of the human biome has been, or our understanding rather of the human biome has been like, oh, you know, like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, like, oh, bacteria have this place. They're not all bad. They're part of us. And now we're in this struggle with a virus. And I think what we're learning out of it is also going to be interesting because it's going to, it is teaching us that, you know, we have this thing that is, we have the biome, but we also have the virome. And so we are these like very complex, biodiverse creatures. And in the middle here, you know, it started off with the central image of a person who's made up of all these organisms, and you know, we look in the mirror and we see ourselves as whole, as this human animal creature, but you know, we're much more than that. And I just built around that image, and I did some cityscape kind of stuff, because cities are very fun to portray. As you can see here in the bottom left corner. And yeah, I don't want to take too much more time, but also I include sometimes intentionally heavy themes, but I don't always like to tell people what to think or what kind of story I'm telling, you know. So there's seated in here are some of my ideas of where we are going with our world and our natural and unnatural environment. But yeah, this one is in progress and throughout various stages. So thanks again. It was nice to be here and be able to experiment in different ways and just you know, flow with the art and not be stuck on a particular idea. So I really appreciate being in this space and having the community and all the help. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Alejo. We're so glad you're here. Just a few comments from the chat about your work regarding your first image Kim shared. I love the chatter on the bird that contrasts with the heavy lines elsewhere. And Allison shares, Alejo, I love how your sensitivity manifests so powerfully in your work. What a gorgeous juxtaposition. Thank you so much. And thanks again for your flexibility. You were not going too long. It was entirely us. We should have scheduled a different order. So thank you. Okay. Our next presenter is M. Prohl, is a multimedia artist using photography to explore transgender bodies and identities. His practice asks the question, what if the depiction of transgender identities could be met with instead of rectification? His self-portraiture creates a new visual vocabulary to describe how it feels and what it means to be transgender. He celebrates discomfort and dysphoria right alongside trans joy and portrays his trans identity as a multifaceted, complex, and sacred experience. His work has been shown locally in Portland, Oregon, where he lives and works, and we're so glad he is at Sitka. Welcome, M.
Hi, everybody. I'm M. Thanks for the introduction, Allison, and thank you to everybody who works at Sitka to make this place a really special place to be, and I'm very grateful and excited to be here. Thank you to my other resident fellows that have been here as well. It's been really great to, especially now, like discover a new community and have other artists working around me at the same time, even if we are socially distant. And thank you to the other presenters that have presented so far. Your work is amazing, and I am inspired by you guys every day. Yeah, so let's just jump in. I have a screen share for you guys, so let's share the screen. So while I was at Sitka, let's put this into a slideshow. Great. While I was at Sitka, I came here let's go back. I came here with kind of nothing in mind. I was sort of in between things. When I graduated from college in 2019, I had done a lot of work in glass. I've always been a photographer, and I've always used photography in my work. However, I don't think of myself as like a photographer. I think of myself as somebody who uses photography to create work. So my thesis, I went to read, and my thesis had to do with a similar theme of depicting myself as a trans person, as a trans man, in a way that was different from depictions of transgender people that I had seen before. So the first couple of slides I have actually here are of my thesis, because I think that's really important to understanding the trajectory of my work. So when I was doing that, I was making images and exploding them digitally, and then recombining them into new bodies, into new shapes, and layering them into 3 dimensions. I felt that it was really important to explore transgender identity and my own identity in a way that didn't have to do with just objectification of bodies or flattening of experiences, or didn't rely on stereotypes. And instead, I wanted to think about things in a very gentle and quiet way, and think about like who I was and who I was becoming, and how other people would perceive me and perceive my community in a way that didn't feel flat. So for my thesis, I created a set of 9 little blocks. I call them fragile constructions. And they were made out of kiln-formed glass, and each one contained a self-portrait that had been pulled apart into 3 different layers and then relayered back on top of themselves to make these full portraits. My theory in much of my work is that transgender people go through a process of self-construction that is very public and very politically fraught. And I think that that's really important to recognize and to look at in the art world in an empathetic light, instead of portraying transgender people as just either like political icons or public figures. I want to explore identity as a personal and sacred and intimate experience. So I did that for my thesis. And that was the work I was doing in 2019. And then I took a little bit of time to just kind of hang out for a second. And then in February of 2020, I decided it was time to go back to doing kiln-formed glass. So I set up some open studio time at Bullseye Glass, and then I scheduled my very first session at Bullseye Glass for March 15th, 2020, the day everything shut down in Portland, Oregon. So that was kind of it for that for a while. So from there, I was kind of stuck in my 600 square foot box house, and I had a coffee table to work with instead of a kiln. So I began to think about how I could explore the construction of transgender identity in 2 dimensions instead. And at the same time, in late February, mid-February of 2020, I also began taking testosterone to treat gender dysphoria. So what that means is, if you're not familiar with hormone replacement therapy, that means that I started to what one might refer to as medically transition. I think that that term is a little bit fraught and a little bit misleading, but for all intents and purposes, it means that I started going through second puberty. And I began taking testosterone thinking that I would have the direct physical support of a network of friends and family that would like be there every step of the way, and everybody would be hanging out all the time, and I would have that community support that I know a lot of my friends and family have also gone through and had as they were going through the same experience. And while I very much still do have that community, it's a little bit different doing it alone in your house with all of your support network online. So my work became even more so internalized and maybe quiet in nature and reflective. And I started to take these self-portraits and layer them on top of each other. And I got really interested in the places in which images kind of build on themselves, on these in-between places where the heads overlap, and where two bodies create something familiar yet different, strange and new. Like it's still my body, but it's also a new shape. So I did this, again, I'm a photographer, so I'm terrible at drawing. I cannot draw. So these are photographs still. And I discovered a method of producing these. It's called an image transfer. So these are digitally created images. They're photographs that I bring into Photoshop and I manipulate them digitally and I color them. And then I print them out onto a sheet of just Xerox paper, just straight out of a regular old printer. And then they are covered in a gel medium. It's basically a Mod Podge transfer. If you're familiar with Mod Podge transfers onto canvas or onto wood, it's the same idea. Cover it in an acrylic gel medium and then press it onto a piece of canvas. And then from there, I let that dry and then I get the paper backing wet and then I peel off the paper backing, kind of like a temporary tattoo works. And the image is mirrored and transferred onto a piece of canvas. So it's somewhere in between photography and painting, and it worked really well for me because I like to use photography instead of learning how to draw. Yeah, and so from there, I began exploring more and more the shapes that bodies make when they're combined and recombined, and thought a lot about bodies in flux and states of in-betweenness. I began to get a little more abstract with my images as the months rolled on, because I was thinking more and more about like a feeling that I was trying to portray about quietness and about small and subtle change and about familiarity and strangeness, all while using the same shapes of the body. And so I was making these works when I got a call from Sitka saying, hey, you should come hang out with us. Yeah, so then I got here and I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do because I felt the need when I got to Sitka to do something new that I hadn't yet done. So I didn't have a formal project going on. And I spent the first little while really just getting a feel for the new environment I was in. I remember when I got here, the very first thing I thought was that it smells different here than it does in Portland. That smell that like something is very much like alive and growing under you has been really pervasive in a good way. Is pervasive like a negative word? Anyway, pervasive in a good way. So I spent a lot of time and I was also lucky to get here during a bit of sun. It was sunny for the whole first week I was here. And I spent that whole week, maybe 2 weeks even, just hiking. And I went out with my camera every day and I took photos of things that were interesting to me. And I found as I went to these places day after day, that the thing that was most interesting to me was the texture of change. So I took a lot of photos of temporal textures, of spaces that were changing from one moment to the next and that were different day after day. So I would go to the beach and I would take pictures of the sea foam, or I would take pictures of the way the grass was being swept by the wind. And some of these textures that I collected were places that changed very quickly, and others were places that I knew were changing, but were changing very slowly. And I felt that it was important to me to collect that kind of change as a way to inform my own understanding of the changes that I was going through. As I continue taking testosterone, I find that some changes happened very fast. I got acne very quickly. And other changes are slower and subtler and maybe less obvious. And I know will continue to change, just like the landscape changes. I really loved this texture in particular. It's just elk tracks in this one piece of mud that I would go past every day. And every day there would be new tracks, and then the rain would come and it would completely wash it away, and it would start over in a repetitive cycle that I found really, really beautiful. And I collected textures of man-made things as well. I went to Grass Mountain once with Bob, who is on staff with the Sitka Center, and we both got very excited about this old decaying machinery in the woods. I think it's a sawmill that's very slowly being consumed by the forest. And that rust texture, this same image actually shows up in my work that I created here. And I would just hike and I would take pictures of the bark and the moss, and sometimes the same texture twice in a day was different the second time I photographed it. And so then I had all of these photos of these interesting textures, and I was like, great, this has nothing to do with the work I usually create. But it occurred to me that in these images that I'm taking, I can talk about the way that I am changing and the way the world around me is changing at the same time. So I started manipulating these images as well and putting them in my backgrounds so that they're supporting the work. So those dark backgrounds that you saw in the black and white pieces, now I am using these textures to inform that. So even if they're not recognizable in the image because they are ultimately abstract images, it's still supported by the concept of change. So I created 10 works while I was here, and I'm just gonna flip through them real quick now. And I like to call these morphs because I'm thinking about bodies morphing into new things and morphing from one thing to another. So morphs 1 through 10. 1, 2, and so on. I'm not going to count them all out, but I thought a lot about how some of these images look like other things. Like this one to me absolutely looks like a new sprouting plant, but it's still literally my body, even if it's not understandable as such. And I thought a lot about how there's still pieces of recognizable structures in all of these, and yet they're like no body that I have ever seen, which I think is a really strange place to be in this body that I'm currently in that is changing and is not like a body that I have seen before, and yet is still literally mine. And so in this image transfer technique that I've been developing, maybe I shouldn't say developing, I'm certainly not the first person to do it, that I am learning. You never really get a perfect print. This particular piece, the 10th one, you can see it most clearly. There are these lighter spaces here where the acrylic medium, the gel medium, doesn't quite adhere correctly to the canvas. And that at first bothered me a lot, that I couldn't get a good print no matter how hard I tried. But I had the idea to cover those places instead in this gold leaf, because to me, I was really interested, like at the time that I came up with it, I was just really interested in the concept of gilding. But I thought that it would be a good addition to these images because to see gold in the context of a strange body, I felt like imparted some kind of new value and new beauty to an otherwise imperfect moment. So even in these imperfect places, there is still beauty, and like in myself, there is still value, even in the spots that are hard or in the spots that are imperfect. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's what I did. Real quick, I'm going to come out of this, and I do have 2 very short videos to show you because I find that it's a little bit hard to describe like how these images are created without seeing it. So I'm going to show you a quick time lapse of what it looks like in removing the paper backing, and then a quick time lapse of the gold leaf going on. And that is what we're doing now. Okay. So here is, I hope that's in full screen. Is that in full screen? Great. So this is what it looks like to pull the paper backing off. And this is a very quick video, and it doesn't actually show the entire process of it. But to pull the paper off of one of these 8x10 images takes like 2 hours. And I think I may have like strained my elbow a little bit doing these here. So it takes a long time. It's a slow process, and it's a very labor-intensive process. And it's also a process that I really like for the meditative quality of it and the metaphoric property of like the work and the time that I'm putting into changing and growing. Yeah, so there's that. And then one more very quick video. Here we go. So then in these imperfect spots, I go over it with an adhesive, and that adhesive dries and it becomes very sticky. And then I put gold leaf over those spots. That takes significantly less time than pulling the paper backing off. And that is how they are made. Yeah, so those are morphs 1 through 10. And I felt very lucky and excited and pleased that I was able to start and end a whole body of work while I was here. It felt like a very productive time, and I am incredibly grateful to, again, the staff and board of Sitka and to my fellow residents for allowing me to be here and giving me this opportunity and supporting my work. And thank you to everybody who is tuning in. I love you all so much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. There are, as we transition to Brittany, there are some wonderful comments and also a couple questions about your process in the chat. You can check out about your gold leaf and the scale of your work and some lovely comments. Okay. Our final presentation is from Brittany Kathy Adams, who is a photographic artist currently located in Portland, Oregon. Her work includes themes of body politics, fat positivity, and interrogating ideas of representation through self-portraiture. Her work has been exhibited throughout institutions such as the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco, California, the Center for Fine Art Photography in Fort Collins, Colorado, and the Center for Photography at Woodstock, New York. She most recently is featured as a guest artist in The Body Issue, published by Haiti Kantz with the Collective Female Photographers Org. She is currently teaching photography with Portland Community College and Clackamas Community College. And please make some noise wherever you are and help me welcome Brittany Kathy Adams to Sitka.
Hi, thanks. And thanks for staying through the whole presentation. It's been really great to see what everyone has been working on because we have definitely been distant, haven't we? And before I start too, I also wanted to say my deep felt thanks to Sitka and the staff. Before I pull up my presentation, I think the thing that I want to say the most is that on the first day, Tamara said something to me that actually changed the course of what I was going to do completely, which was like, take some time and think about, you know, what you like to do, and also take some time before you do anything and just take it all in and take a breath and kind of feel it out. And it surprised the hell out of me, for lack of a better word. But let me go ahead and pull up my presentation. And for those of you that are here that do know me, this is something totally different. So, okay, let's do this. Okay, so I did want to pull up one of the images that I applied to Sitka with. I've always, since I really started, working on my body of work, I am someone who is like a serial long-term worker. I've always worked on bodies of work for a ridiculous amount of time. Like I don't know when to quit. And so the image that you're seeing up on the screen right now was one of the last images I made in 2017 of a 12-year-long project that had to do with fat bodies and self-portraiture and fat liberation, which is a topic I could go on and on about at another time, because for the first time, I released myself from feeling like making more work when I wasn't feeling that in my own body. And I decided to tap into a third of my own archive. So I definitely reclused quite a bit. Actually at Sitka, I had in a cabin that's like right around the library, and I almost saw no one, which is a little embarrassing to say. I'm glad to have met some of you distantly from afar finally, but it was me and a scanner. And at the end of this, 374 scans. So I don't know what I did with myself, but here we go. So to start with, I wanted to start with an image of my home, of a place that Sitka deeply felt connected to. I grew up in Humboldt County, California, and I grew up in a pretty low-income household. So what was really common for our family was going out and throwing nets into the sea to get fish, deer hunting, driving out to the coast, playing tourist in our own backyard. And I'm a deeply sentimental person who has far more trinkets and agates than you could ever imagine. So I was like, all right, well, you're sick, don't bring home 10 pounds of things. And I wanted to start here too, because I left my home when I was, let's see, I'm trying to remember what year that was. I left Humboldt County in 2010 to pursue my master's in photography, and I had been working on my body work for that time. And then as I started kind of going back home, I could tell that I was starting to live a completely different life than what I had known. I was the first in my family to go to college. I was the first in my family in so many ways to leave a county where we have now been for a very long time. I'm a deeply sentimental person. And so this work really started as soon as I left. And it really surrounds the matriarch of my family, who I lost 2 years ago. It's weird to talk about. We'll see how I can talk about it. I'm doing this. We got this. I am pumping myself up while I'm talking. But I wanted to share that alongside of these 374 scans, of which I'm sorry, I'm only showing 12. I have a voicemail on my phone. I have a handwritten grocery list from a woman who was my best friend. So my grandmother passed 2 years ago, and it was probably the biggest thing that has happened in my life since leaving. And as I was going back home and working on all this body work at school, people were like, oh, this work must be so hard for you. Do you do anything else? And I was like, yes. And they're like, can we see it? And I was like, no. So it's a really vulnerable spot to show a lot of these things. But this woman was the person who taught me to be who I am now, the woman who pushed and motivated me to do what I do. And home and what it means to be someone who's still looking for home as a 33-year-old has been centered around the fact that I'm trying to understand the connections that I'm making, or the connections that I have to someone who's not here anymore. So the work is deeply, it's deeply personal, but at the same time, I think the work that I always make really tries to say, vulnerability is something that I find really important, and this is where I'm at. this is something I've tried to fight for a long time, that in the 2 years that I've lost her, that I'm somehow done grieving. But Sitka actually gave me a huge chunk of time to do the grieving process I didn't know I was done with, or I thought I was done with. So I sat through 2 hours of an interview of watching us talk while I scanned images. It was kind of a bizarre moment to feel in that silence that I was with her. And so the work is not only portrait based, it has a lot to do with my upbringing. It involves elements of nature, of home, of a, of a deeply sentimental and romantic that I am, of small moments, pulled back moments, everyday things like my father getting done working on the car. And photography for me has always been this sentimental and desperate way to hold close to the things that I know are changing, that I'd love to stop from changing. And so this home is no longer in my family. My parents rented their home all the way through my grandma's death until she passed her house on to them. So this work is nowhere near being done, because this space where I sat with her, where I photographed her reading mail and talking to her, is going to be something that I photographed my own mother in as she ages, and our relationship. And so much of our relationship is something I'm still trying to figure out, because in my mom's age, she already had children, and I don't have children. I moved away. I did the career thing. I went to school. And so much of like the work that I make now, I'm still figuring out. So I definitely don't want to sit here and tell you, here's my thesis on the work. I'm making it and I'm crying over it and I'm talking to it and it's talking back to me, which sounds silly maybe. But I do think that if we leave enough space with our work to look at it, to see it, to take it in, that it'll talk to us. And so this is an image I made, I want to say 2013. So I have everything from 2013 to 2020 that I've begun to scan in. And this is my mother's and grandmother's hand in a forest grove in Humboldt County. So it's been an interesting experience to be out at Sitka, to feel the reflections and the echoes in the space, the pampas grass and the bull kelp, which I was so excited to hear more about, the water, the ocean, the smell. A lot of it pulled me back into the memories I have. And so a lot of this work is, at one point when I talk about it in a celebratory way, but I recognize right now, I'm still absorbing it. I'm still taking it in. I still feel very sensitive about a lot of it. And I always ask myself, when was I going to be ready? Sitka was the quiet that made me go, you're ready. You can do it. This one is an image actually that I took out right past the river house, actually. And growing up in a family that did do so much of our love and our entertainment and our labor outside. This is an image that I just happened to catch that made me so excited. It's a brand new image from 2020, from like 2 months ago, 1 month ago. I don't even know where time has gone anymore. That made me really excited about just still that fascination that so many of you actually just talked about, like turning over rocks and finding crabs, looking at the small details of the forest overtaking things, like those moments of getting to spend time like that. Those are what made so much of my upbringing. And it's surprising. I always think, I've got this idea. You don't have to do it romantically. You can do it any way you want. And I fall back into being like, it's just who I am. And this is the last image I wanted to share. It's the first one I scanned. It's the first one I edited. This is actually an edited image. Most of what you just saw is completely raw, unedited, except for 3 of them. But I wanted to end here because this is the image that has lived in the back of my head for years. The one that's tugged at me going, you're going to work with this one day. You'll be able to work with this one day. And I think that this time has really given me that moment to say, like, it's okay that it doesn't all feel good yet. So it's been a surprise to me. I really thought I was like gonna go out there and make more body work and run out there and like continue to work on like fat liberation and justice, which is such a huge part of what I do. But part of being present with myself is recognizing that this has taken up my whole space lately. And it was time. And it feels interesting to know that there's more to come. There's way more to come. And there's images that from here have now made me connect and go, okay, I can see where this is headed. I can see what I want next. And like as a last share here, since I just hit my 10-minute mark, is that every day now, I actually wear the same ring in this photograph. So again, right, like deeply, deeply sentimental, no apologies for it, but it's something that has really meant a great deal to me to have this time and space. So thank you for allowing me to share my work. Thank you for giving me the space. And thank you for the other residents who, even if I haven't completely met you from afar, stalking online has been something to feel that camaraderie. So thank you, Allison. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Nicola, and the staff as well at all Sitka. It's been a really healing process.
Brittany, thank you so much. I'll just read a few closing comments and sign us off for the night. Nancy shares deeply personal, yet also deeply universal. Thank you so much for sharing this. Em and Brittany, thank you for sharing your vulnerability and lead into creativity. Paulette shares, thank you for your transparency, Brittany, of you and your work together. You're speaking to an incredibly deep human place. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to Brittany, Em, Emma, Alejo, Justin, and Alice for sharing your work with the Sitka community near and far tonight. Sitka community near and far, thank you for showing up in full supportive force. This is the largest virtual audience we've had for a show and tell event, well over 100 people here on Zoom and others streaming through other formats as well. So thanks for coming out and supporting our residents. From everyone at Sitka, we wish you health and happiness in the new year. There is more to come. Good night.